co-director of the Talent Mobility Fund, Doug Rand is a startup founder, immigration expert, and policymaker who trained as an evolutionary biologist. He served as senior advisor to the director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services from 2021 to 2025, and as an assistant director for entrepreneurship in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy from 2010 to 2017. As an entrepreneur, he was the co-founder and president of Boundless and the co-founder and CEO of PlayScripts, Inc. Welcome, Doug, to the podcast. It is great to have you here today.
Thank you, Sophie. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm so curious because in reading your bio, I realized about your background in evolutionary biology. So how the heck did you go from that to immigration policy and entrepreneurship?
Well, I like to say that I've been extraordinarily farsighted about every step in my career path, and that it was all planned from the very beginning. But of course, that's nonsense. I really loved biology, still do. Studied that in college, ended up going to grad school, and there's a whole story there. But basically, I was kind of torn between going all the way through the PhD in evolutionary biology on the one hand, or on the other hand, starting a company with my brother that had nothing to do with biology at all. And so I was spending all day at the lab worrying about the company and all night on the company worrying about the lab. And eventually I took a leave of absence and did the company. And that's how I got into entrepreneurship. And from there, I got this incredible opportunity to work in the Obama White House on policies to promote entrepreneurship. And as part of that job, I realized that DHS was the unofficial regulator of global talent, and that anyone who cares about entrepreneurship and innovation ought to care about immigration policy. So I started learning more about that and getting involved in that administration. And so one thing just kind of led to another. But in retrospect, I think it's been helpful to have that lived experience of, the reality of doing science and having this tough, undercompensated lab work grind.
Yeah. Wow. And that's all in addition to your JD, where you studied at Yale. You went to law school, right?
I did. That was kind of my extremely predictable response to the question, wow, I love this company I'm working on, but someday I want to get involved in policy. How do I make the leap from random entrepreneur to
you had this interest in policy and public service.
That's right. And I had the very parochial answer, I guess I go to law school. But I was fortunate, and I did, and I loved it, and it was great. It was a great opportunity. But that was what gave me the opportunity to be a fellow in the White House in the first place.
Wow. Yeah, I love how you phrase that. DHS is the unofficial regulator of global talent. I absolutely agree. And it's so interesting that is how the system ends up working in practice. Right. It wasn't designed that way. That's not supposed to be what it does. But because the United States is such an attractive destination for the world's, really brilliant founders, scientists, innovators, it ends up being that DHS does regulate them on their paths to, LA, New York, San Francisco, wherever it is that they might be wishing.
And other communities all over the country. Yep.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you became the senior advisor to the director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. You all accomplished so much in that term. Can you share with us some of the key insights you've had or some of the main initiatives that you all focused on?
Sure. Well, I want to start by saying it was an incredible team that we had. Orja Du, as the director of USCIS, former general counsel of the agency, so she really knew her stuff, and is just an extraordinary leader as well. And so really up and down the agency, it was a 21 people and only a dozen political appointees. So I loved working with my fellow politicals, but really got to know and appreciate the work of so many civil servants, throughout the agency. that do their work very quietly, and usually behind the scenes, and without the appreciation that they deserve, particularly now. So that's another story we can get into later if you want. But while we were there during the Biden administration, we did get a lot done. It's never as much as you want to get done. You always wish you could do more. And we don't have time for me to go into all of the accomplishments of the agency at large, as a whole. Hopefully, we can drop a full list in the show notes. But I can certainly speak to a couple of things I had the privilege of working on directly. So I had a really cool portfolio. I got to work on policy, regulations and policy updates and things, particularly with you usually focused on employment-based immigration. But then in terms of agency-wide issues, I got to do a more operational role, trying to improve the agency's efficiency so that we could serve people better with faster wait times, and also and did a lot of work on how we use technology and improve digital delivery. So, gosh, there's no one thing I'm most proud of. We did a lot. I mean, I think a lot of people are thinking about H-1Bs this time of year. We published a comprehensive modernization rule for the H-1B program, that
still in effect as of this time of this recording.
Absolutely, and I think still in effect, and hopefully in effect for a while. It's not a particularly ideological.
Yes. No, I had a lot to clarify and simplify H-1B standards, and also allow more oversight of companies. So I think it covered all the things it needed to.
Thank you. Yeah. Does all the things, but and of course that was preceded by a smaller rule that was just focused on H-1B registration.
Yes.
And this was a very, very necessary rule, seemingly simple. We inherited this H-1B registration system that on its face, even at the time during the first Trump administration, I thought, that's a very reasonable thing they're doing, which was making it so you don't have to file a whole petition without knowing if you won the lottery. You can do a simple and not too expensive registration.
That alone saved so many trees and so many
and fuel.
Fuel costs, the carbon impact of that decision.
Yes. However, it had an unintended but not unforeseeable consequence. At the time when that rule was being done by the first Trump administration, I think a lot of experts commented, "Hey, this is great, but it's going to be very easy to abuse." But those calls went unheeded, and so it was published as is. And sure enough, every year after that, the number of H-1B registrations ticked up and up and up beyond the point of really legitimacy, right? Go ahead, what were you going to say?
No, when the H-1B registration rule came out, I remember reading the entire preamble with some of the interesting statistics. And I was wondering if you could speak to that, like the number of registrations. There were some registrants who had an exceptionally high number of registrations, which was very interesting to note. I don't know if you recall those statistics.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we worked really, very closely on this, and it was not a good situation. Basically, because the lottery was applied to registrations and not to individual humans, any individual human could be registered a bunch of times by a bunch of different companies, even if those companies were only companies on paper and were actually part of a scheme to register the same person a bunch of times. So what was happening was a bunch of LLCs you've never heard of were being set up by unscrupulous people to register the same person a bunch of times, right? So, no company could register the same person more than once, but a whole cluster of companies that were under the same control of the same individual could register the same person 10 times, 50 times in some cases.
The way the rules had been written for the paper-based lottery, you had to pay all the filing fees. So there was no incentive for fake companies or fake job offers. But I recall reading that some of the registrants had over 70 were registered over 70.
That's right. Yeah, it was. I mean, that was relatively infrequent, but there were
Yeah.
there were some people that were some instances were very egregious, even more than 70. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but having someone registered 10 times, 20 times was not uncommon.
Yeah.
And so, this was unacceptable. What it meant was that companies that were playing by the rules had a roughly 20% chance of the
Yeah.
would-be employee getting selected, and companies that were skirting the rules had effectively 100% chance of getting that person through one of their network of not real companies. So we knew we had to shut this down, and we took a very deliberate approach. I hope this is interesting. I'm really good.
It's very interesting. Yeah.
So we knew in the end we'd have to do a regulation to fix the old flawed regulation. We didn't want to sit on our hands in the meantime because regulations take a long time. So the first thing we did was we added attestation language to the H-1B petition because it turns out that USCIS, since it's not an enforcement agency, doesn't have a ton of enforcement authorities, particularly at the company level. We can revoke petitions, we can deny petitions, but that has like a marginal effect on the employer and a devastating effect on the worker, right?
Yeah.
Department of Labor has more tools to go after employers, but USCIS, it's shocking, has very few that Congress has provided.
Okay.
Right. So we wanted to make sure there were more consequences for unscrupulous employers. So the first thing we did was we added attestation language saying, okay, if you're registering using the registration system, you attest to the fact that you're not gaming the system. So now if you game the system, you're committing perjury. And so we were able to say very publicly, just a reminder, this is the attestation language. Some people have violated it. We are referring them to law enforcement. And when we did that, it was very interesting. We saw an immediate drop off in the number of people who, in the number of companies that may have won the registration lottery, but did not then file a petition. And that is why you saw multiple lottery rounds.
That's why we had so many lotteries.
Yeah, which was good. Like mission accomplished, at least in the interim. Right?
For sure. Well, and another thing that's affecting this year's lottery, and I'll just say, when we're recording this, it's the day after the lottery closed, and at first glance, we had, I would say, last year, due to these system changes, we probably had like a 20% overall selection rate for non-master's cap and master's cap, but this year it seems like it's jumped up to 30%, which could also be a result of the fee increase. But there's some factors that go into this, but the lottery fee went from $10 to $215 this year, which was another effect. So that might have also helped to stave off some of the less.
Yeah, I hope so. That's really interesting and not shocking. I'm glad to see that the selection rate is higher, not lower. But so that was an interim step that I think helped. Level the playing field, not level the playing field, but squeeze out some fraud, but it wasn't enough. And so we completed this regulation, which was really the obvious fix, which is like, you got to provide a passport number, and therefore we can apply the lottery to unique individuals. And so it doesn't matter how many times you get registered, you have the same shot. You have the same single lottery ticket as everybody else. And overnight, well, not overnight, but that year, as many of your listeners probably saw, we went from something like, 800,000 registrations the year before to like 400,000, which I think is probably the natural demand. So we'll see. That USCIS hasn't yet released the registration numbers for this fiscal year, but I would hope and expect they will in the next week or two. That would be a normal cadence. And we'll see what the number of selections was.
One of the other regulatory changes that I really appreciated that happened within the administration was, and this was echoed in the H-1B modernization rule, but the acceptance of startup founders as being eligible as H-1B beneficiaries. And in the previous Trump 1.0 administration, that was super murky water. Attorneys were hesitant, seemed theoretically possible. But a lot of clarity was given to that in the Biden administration. leading many of our clients who owned 100% of their companies as startup founders, or, 70%, 60%, whatever, but we were able to secure their H-1Bs for them. Mm-hmm. And it really helped. And then the final element of that was the recognition in the H-1B modernization rule, just saying, hey, if you own over 50%, it's going to be an 18-month petition period for the first 2 periods. And it's like, oh, great. Okay, cool. Yeah, you want to have oversight that the business is really viable. So we're going to do 18 months instead of 36 months. And it's great that there's recognition that more than 50% owners can qualify. So it's super helpful.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that. And I think it points to something that is a interesting theme in kind of immigration practice that I've been maybe slow to appreciate, which is that policy is never self-executing. Policymakers spend all this time coming up with, what we hope is a really compelling and clear, policy guidance document or regulation or whatever. And it still takes time for people to really trust that the world has changed. Yeah. And it takes energy to change the inertia, because the fact is there was a lot of folklore, I think, impeding people from being beneficiary owners on an H-1B. A lot of it due to an older concept that had already been obliterated by in litigation, the employer-employee relationship.
Yeah.
Like that used to be a thing, but then there was litigation over the past couple of years. It's not a thing anymore, but people really needed to see that in black and white, I think, before they.
Practitioners, it's so scary, Doug, because it's like, well, we have this client, they're willing to pay us for something. It's their one shot and it's urgent and important. So which route do we put them on?
Right.
And so it takes a long time to find, I think of like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, working for the ACLU in the early days, trying to line up the ideal test subjects for litigation. And I feel like that's what I'm doing. I have this like immigration theory where I read a policy. I'm like, oh, I think there might be a way. But waiting for that one client where it's important, it's urgent, that's their only and best option. They're apprised of the risk. They're willing to take it. It takes a lot to do human subjects research in the legal space.
That's so interesting. Like, who are the early adopters?
Yeah.
Oh, that is interesting. Yeah. I'm sure this will come up more in our conversation, but, so God, this is going to sound like, I don't know, maybe it's a little much, but I do want to go through some of the other things I felt.
Let's hear it. Let's give me the list. Let's celebrate the thing.
So we had, in terms of other regulations, like full regulations, which is, the law of the land until re-regulated or enjoined by a court. We extended the validity period for employment authorization documents.
Yeah, that was great.
In a way, like, this isn't like, this should just be common sense, right? Like, nobody should lose their work authorization because the government was too slow. And when we came in, we had, again, inherited, still COVID times. Yeah. We inherited an agency that had been starved of resources, undergone a furlough threat, was still under a hiring freeze. So, the number of officers had been plummeting, the amount of work had been going up. And so, there were backlogs everywhere. And by the end of the first year, a really unacceptable, anyone is unacceptable, but a really unconscionable number of people were just seeing their work permits expire for no reason other than the fact that we hadn't dug out of the backlog. And that's, nobody should have to experience that. So we realized, and when I say we, I mean civil servant subject matter experts in the agency realized, not me personally, that, hey, we already have this auto extension for people who timely file. It just isn't long enough under the circumstances. We could issue a temporary final rule that takes effect immediately and increase that auto extension to a comfortable length. And so we did that once. I think it was in early 2022, and it was incredibly gratifying to know that, like, just as a matter of publishing this wonky text in the Federal Register, like 70,000 people could return to work the next day. Yeah. 400,000 people could be confident that they wouldn't run out of time. Then, of course, life intervenes, and we weren't able to catch up as fast as we thought, so we had to reissue what was a temporary final rule, and then finally make it permanent at the very end of the administration. So everybody right now, well, not everybody, most people, there's a bunch of different complicated eligibility categories, but anyone who's eligible for an automatic extension for timely filed work permit application, it's a 540-day auto extension for the foreseeable future. Don't want to jinx it, but that's where we are now. And again, like this is just an obvious, I wouldn't even say good government. It's like minimally competent government thing, right? Like nobody should lose something they're entitled to and eligible for just because the government's slow. Right. Then we did the first fee rule in almost 8 years. I'd love to get your candid thoughts on this. You don't have to, the fee rule, the first fee rule for USCIS in almost 8 years, which, we needed more money to hire more officers and to provide better service. I know that a lot of attorneys and others in the field were dubious because it feels like USCIS just keeps raising fees and bringing in more money, and wait times are still high. And we tried really hard to, to have progress behind this so that people could understand that we were good stewards of the resources and that we were in fact bringing down backlogs and bringing down wait times, not as much as we should have, but as much as we could under the circumstances. And so it's not just about getting more money and hiring more people. It's also about being more efficient, but there is no substitute for more dollars. And the agency needed those dollars to ultimately bend the curve on that.
And working with a lot of early stage startups, one of the things that I appreciated, the fee schedule is insanely complicated now. So
yeah,
but on the other hand, for companies with less than 25 employees, there's reduced fees. And for startups and early stage businesses, those lower amounts, many of which barely changed or, or maybe didn't
right.
change, like that makes a really big difference from the entrepreneurship perspective. So
I'm glad to hear that. I mean, we tried to be thoughtful about it. There were a lot of changes from the proposed rule to the final rule. Yeah. So everyone should be confident that those public comments really matter. At least they did at the time, all the times that I've been in public service. So I mean, the idea was we want to, I mean, it was basically progressive taxation, right? I mean, the higher fee hikes were on larger companies with the ability to pay, and for individuals, we tried to keep the fees, not rising so high. And we expanded the number of people pretty significantly who are in humanitarian categories and shouldn't be expected to pay for, necessarily for their humanitarian protections and for downstream immigration filings. So that was, I think we made the best of the situation and did that, very much trying to take into account the concerns that we heard. I mean, there was an irony for me personally, which was, I didn't mention this before, but the company I started in my 20s with my brother was a theater publishing company. And so for my first decade of my career, I was really, really tied into the theater community. And then we put up this fee rule, this is like years later.
There's so many sides to you, Doug.
Yes. It's all very ruthlessly plotted. But so we put out this fee rule and like completely unintended out of like hundreds of the comments were from arts and theater organizations that were like, we hate this. It's going to make us shut down. Like, we can't pay these fees. What are you doing? Like, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be responsible for like killing American theater. So we made sure in the final rule that that like nonprofit arts groups, you got to carve out.
Yeah, the nonprofits.
We're just heavily burdened.
Yeah. Which was great. Yeah, thank you for that.
But that again, that's why like there's so much buzz right now.
Yeah.
About government inefficiency, and it's coming from the right and from the left, and it's real. Don't get me wrong, but there is a time and a place for process and deliberation, and like we'll talk about this more, I hope. But like the Administrative Procedure Act as enacted in the 1940s, like
Right.
when it's done properly, like it serves a purpose. Like you get really good feedback from the public, and you
Right.
correct things that you wouldn't have known if you had just gone straight to a final rule. So
Well, and I also want to, talk about your time in the White House OSTP, which kind of relates to the APA with that important litigation. So, but any other highlights from the Biden years
yeah,
that
okay, okay. Lightning round. We finalized a fair and humane public charge rule,
yeah.
um, that's sensible and make sure that non-citizens, and I would add their U.S. citizen family members, um, aren't scared from using health and nutrition benefits that they have always been eligible for, and that was really important. We did reduce the overall backlog at USCIS for the first time in over a decade, even as filings went up by 50%, which is pretty remarkable, over the course of that 4 years. As you know, we had an unusually large number of employment-based green cards that we needed to
Oh,
process, or they would disappear, and we did that for 3 years in a row. Um, and on naturalization, we lowered the median processing time from almost a year to just 5 months, and we naturalized, I believe, more people than any other presidential term. So 3.5 million new U.S. citizens over the course of 4 years,
that's
um,
amazing.
which is really, really awesome. And then yeah, I mean, something we'll probably talk about more is we put out a lot of new guidance and policy, particularly for highly skilled um,
Mhm.
uh,
Yeah,
science and
there
engineering
was the
professionals.
EB2 and IW memo, there was the
Hmm.
O1A memo, there was really great website guidance for people getting laid off. There's great
That's
website guidance
right. Yeah,
for entrepreneurs. A lot of really great helpful things to help support people to utilize the existing legal immigration framework more fully.
that's right. And also, like, I mean, you'll appreciate this, I think, and many of your listeners, but like, I learned kind of the hard way that, again, we talked about like nothing is self-executing. Um, when the layoffs started happening in the tech industry, and I started reading, these terrible stories of people
Yeah.
like feeling like they pack up within 60 days. There were hundreds and hundreds of news stories about all these people have to leave within 60 days. All these people have to leave within 60 days. And so I immediately went to our experts, our civil servant experts, and it's like,
Mhm.
what do we do? What can we do to help, mitigate this challenge people are facing? And they all said, oh, well, it's not really, they have more than 60 days. Like, what do you mean? Well, 60 days is when your H-1B status expires, but you can stay in a period of authorized stay, as long as you have a pending petition for this. Like, there are all these scenarios in which
Yes, yes,
you can
yes, yes.
actually stay longer than 60
Yeah.
days. So why is everybody so worked up? And I was like, I don't think anybody knows that, or if they do, they don't believe it, or if they, um, and so that's why we put out, just
Yeah.
FAQs, right? It was just like, hey, FAQs, here's the reality. And I wanted to lean in a lot further and be like, what you're reading in the news is not true. And our lawyers were like, you can't say that. You can't like throw shade at
Acknowledge
NPR.
the
And
political
yeah,
moment.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But so I put that out and I was like, great, done. Mic drop. No. I talked to lots of lawyers and lots of
Yeah.
other people. And over the course of the next couple of months, they were like, that was really helpful. But, I'm still not comfortable telling my client to do this or that because you didn't say explicitly that it's okay to do a job search while you're on a visitor visa.
Right.
Or,
Oh, I've been
you
guys the
know,
ones who told you that. Can
yeah,
you look
yeah,
for a
yeah, you
job
are
on
right.
B1?
So I was like, go back to the subject matter experts. I'm like, well, can we say this? They're like, well, yeah, we can say that. That's always been the rules. Like, why did people know that already? Like, no, nobody knows it already. Like this may be like something well established inside the agency, but if we don't say it out loud
Yes.
on a .gov website, it's not real. Like,
Right.
and so it was extraordinary to me to learn that, you know, an FAQ, while it's not changing law and it's not changing policy, like can change reality because people desperately need to see that something is true on a
Right.
government website that they can rely on and not just like folklore and tradition.
Absolutely. So then to talk a little bit about how maybe that time differed from your time in the Obama White House with the Office of Science and Technology Policy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think of international entrepreneur parole through that rule as a very, significant thing that came from that time. But are there other, just curious, how that may be compared to the Biden times and what was achieved then that carried through? Just any general reflections on those two different phases?
Sure. I mean, I think in the first term of the Obama administration, um, there were, and what that was when Alan Mayorkas was the head of USCIS, and he did a terrific job. And he was really interested in, obviously lots of things that you need to be as the director of a big agency that does a lot of things, but he was really interested in figuring out what we could do on for scientists and engineers and entrepreneurs. And so in that first term, we did some things, and we announced some things from the White House to try to tweak, clarify. I think it was all good things, but it was, in retrospect, much less ambitious than what came later. But it definitely got, I think, more people in the administration and people, in those tech communities kind of acquainted with where the friction spots were. And so in the second term, we had this shining moment where most people thought we were going to get comprehensive reform done, and it feels like talking about a different world or a different historical epoch, but we had this bill that passed the Senate with 68 votes, tons of Republicans, all the Democrats, endorsed by every interest group you can possibly think of, including not one but two different startup visas. It was like, a generationally transformative bill that then didn't even get a vote in the Republican-controlled House. And after that happened, there were like 2 years left. The Obama administration and the president announced, well, if Congress won't do the job, I'm going to do the best I can with my existing executive authorities. And that led us all in that administration on like a 2-year sprint to do as much as we could. And, that ranged the gamut. There were things about making enforcement smarter and trying to help folks who were undocumented. And it was a whole bundle of policies, but there were some high skill immigration policies in there that really have endured. So the international entrepreneur rule was one of them. We also strengthened and protected the OPT STEM.
You made that 17 to 24 months, right?
That's right. And also, not for nothing, like it was vulnerable to litigation, and one is never entirely out of the woods, but that litigation continued for years afterwards. And I think we're in a better place now because we strengthened the legal justification for that program, which was, by the way, a Bush administration program.
Interesting.
Yep. The OPT STEM, like twilight of the George W. Bush administration. And then I think the most impactful thing we did was the H-4 EAD rule.
Yeah. How many people? I mean, that's changed tens of thousands of people's lives.
There's at least 100,000 people right now who have EADs, who are spouses of H-1B workers who wouldn't be able to work but for that regulation. And since I guess it's been 10 years now since we put it out, I'm sure more than 100,000 people have benefited.
Oh yeah. And well, you mentioned a little bit earlier about the Administrative Procedures Act, and I think that really came into light for me with what happened with the International Entrepreneur Rule. So just my quick summary is Obama administration put out this great regulation to create this pathway for international founders. Trump 1.0 kind of arbitrarily decided to cancel the program. Bunch of litigation ensued with the National Venture Capital Association arguing that cancellation violated the Administrative Procedure Act.
Which it did.
The judge agreed. And so the program got to live, and then it got resurrected in the Biden administration, and several people have been able to come through on that. I think, we need a startup visa, but it's great to have something, and it's great that the Administrative Procedures Act helped establish that pathway, because you have to follow the rules about how to make rules and how to change rules and how to end rules.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And it's still there. I mean, I learned a lot. God, I mean, that's a long story, well summarized by you. But it's been over 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Working on the regulation, getting it published, defending it in the courts, and then finally having the chance to implement it. And that implementation phase was much more complicated than I ever expected. Um, Again, there's this reality check where you like craft this policy and spend all this time on a policy, and then you got implementers and operators in a big agency that have to deal with the nitty gritty of how you actually make it work. Like, who's actually going to print the parole notice for the
Yeah, I
spouse
remember
of the
that.
entrepreneur, right? Like who is the actual human being that's going to actually, which actual printer, right? And these things are not always obvious in
Or
large
there was
agencies.
something too that you helped straighten out, which was like CBP was issuing parole at the border for like a truncated period of time.
Yeah,
Your
yeah.
system was set up that way
Right, right.
arbitrarily. Yeah.
Right. Well, this gets back to your original point. It's like there's always a learning curve, right? Even in
Yeah.
internal to agencies, like you have to get started. You have to put one foot in front of the other. There will be
Yeah.
kinks, like things aren't going to work, and so you gotta take them as they come. But by the time we were done, it was really working well. Like I could say, in all honesty and all enthusiasm, which I hope broke through, like,
Yeah.
hey, it works. There's no backlog. Give it a shot. And you go ahead.
I don't know if you're able to speak to this, but based on your personal experience, if things were to continue as they had been, what would be a reasonable time estimate that it might take somebody to get a decision if they apply now? If things were,
Gosh.
consistent, if you could.
I mean, like, hopefully, it's funny. I actually I struggle internally. I wanted to put a number on it.
Could have gotten that.
um, but I mean, again, who knows what the future will bring? But we're in like 3 to 6 month range. And I think well, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but hopefully there'll be public data that can help reality check this going forward. But the thing is, hopefully we left behind an immigration system that has multiple options for entrepreneurs. We published a pretty comprehensive list of all the pathways in multiple languages. Perfect, great. I hope that continues to be a useful resource for people. But there's the H-1B path, like you said, that might make sense for some people. There's the O1 path, might make sense for some people. The International Entrepreneur Rule was always designed to be kind of a pathway for the people who are really just getting started and don't have a ton of accomplishments, but have the validation of an investor with skin in the game. Mm-hmm. And also, it allows for a spouse to get a work permit. So it's still an attractive option, even though I wish, in retrospect, we've been able to, have premium processing and all the other things that people have come to expect from other pathways. So there's no one perfect thing that's one size fits all, but hopefully, people feel like they're able to explore their options.
Good to have more. Certainly, we have way more options than we did 4 or 5 years ago, for sure. So that's helpful. Now, tell us about what you're doing now at the Talent Mobility Fund.
Sure. So the Talent Mobility Fund is not about policy or advocacy. It's about taking the immigration system as it is, warts and all, and asking ourselves, how do we make this system work as well as possible for scientists, engineers from other countries who we really, as a country, need to recruit and retain for our future economic growth and national security and shared prosperity. And I think that's a little counterintuitive. Everyone I've tried to explain this to since I started a month or two ago, it's like, oh, so you're doing advocacy, right? It's like, no, we're not. Well, then how do you recruit and retain more immigrants if you're not trying to improve the immigration system? Well, the immigration system is more than just the laws and is more than just the agencies. It's this whole ecosystem, as you know well, of attorneys and universities and employers and the scientists and engineers and workers themselves. and an increasing number of tech companies that are trying to provide services. So there's this whole ecosystem of players that are trying to access and understand and navigate the system. And that's where there's actually a lot of market failures and a lot of inertia and a lot of opportunity. Because, it's not every law firm that is doing what you do and trying to find the perfect early adopter, to go through a pathway that might seem scary or intimidating or not well trodden. So we did a ton of work, as you know, to try to make it very clear for STEM professionals and entrepreneurs of how to determine if you're eligible for, not just the H-1B, but J-1 or an O-1 extraordinary ability visa, or a number of other pathways, some of them green card pathways. And I'd like to hear from you, to what extent you think that had an impact, but I don't think we're anywhere close to, universal knowledge or pursuit of all the available pathways. And so in a nutshell, the Talent Mobility Fund is about raising philanthropic dollars and deploying them to nonprofits and startups and potentially, associations and other players in the ecosystem to try to help more eligible people walk through the doors that are already open.
Is it a PR campaign? But you're investing in startups, right? Like one of the grants for startups. So there's so many things that these philanthropic dollars will go towards many different things within the ecosystem appropriate to the type of organization and their type of work.
Is it? That's right. So, we're looking at, I think of it as kind of all four quadrants of talent recruitment and retention, right? So there's how does a talented scientist or engineering student get here to study in the first place? And that corridor is actually works reasonably well because we have this thing called higher education, and colleges and universities actually are scouring the world for great talent, and that's something the country does pretty well. I think there's an unfortunate barrier in terms of cost, where we might not be recruiting every top individual because not everyone can pay full freight, and not every university is need-based for international students, far from it. But so, that's an area we're looking at. And then I think, the next hurdle becomes, okay, I've graduated from a U.S. university. How do I stay? We lose a lot of people at that step. So that's really about recruitment and retention of people in higher education. But then, there's plenty of talented people who don't necessarily go to school here. If you've got somebody who is working in the United States in a science or engineering field, and they're, they haven't. Sorry, we're going to record this again.
They might have just been sponsored for an H-1B from
exactly.
For example, you don't have to have an F1 to get here.
Exactly. Like that's kind of the canonical pathway. But you might have come here on any number of work visas. But hey, you want to stay. You want to become an American. We lose a lot of people who aren't able to navigate that.
Well, in the early 2000s, when H-1Bs were abundant and it was Y2K and we increased the number, there was no lottery. You could just come here to work. And a lot of companies was like, oh yeah, we have this great candidate in Japan. We want them to move here in 2 months. Get them a visa. It was possible back then. Yeah.
And then I think the toughest quadrant of all is actively recruiting people to the United States for the first time to work in a
That's hard. Wouldn't that be amazing? I mean, if you went to somebody and said, hey, here's a job, we'll pay you and get you your visa, wouldn't that be easy? They would say yes.
I mean, maybe, but think about all the things like they have a family and, they have deep roots to wherever they are. And how do they relocate and so on and so forth. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I doubt we're anywhere close.
Right.
As a systems matter, right?
Yes.
We are
There's
the
no
beneficiaries.
Scholarship for family relocation where you just
exactly right. And there's no higher ed, there's no equivalent of like the higher ed system that's scouring the earth and gobbling up.
And once you have kids and you have a home, you really want stability. So it kind of takes more to get somebody
And also, I think companies uh, are are not necessarily. Let me put it this way. Um,
They're
you've
not
heard the
necessarily
phrase.
incentivized to do this because their incentive is retention.
That's right. Retention is so much less expensive than recruitment.
Mm-hmm.
Recruitment is mostly done at universities or
Mm-hmm.
poaching from people who are already here, right?
Yes.
Like if you are in a talent role or an HR role or a recruitment role at a big company, or let alone a small company that doesn't even have that function, like what's your what's your what's your toolkit going to look like? What are you going to do first? Are you going to recruit at universities, which everybody knows how to do? Are you going to use a headhunter and poach from a competitor like everybody knows how to do? Or are you going to like roam the earth looking for someone in a completely different country that's not working for your company, right? It's just not done very often,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's kind of counterintuitive because everyone talks about, oh, there's a war for talent. There's a war for talent. And it's true.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like whoever gets the most talented people is going to rule this century, as far as like geopolitics. But it's way easier said than done, right?
Right.
When you start looking beyond your borders, like we are a little bit, what's the right word? The United States
Short-sighted?
complacent. I think the word I was
Complacent.
looking for is complacent. The United States has grown complacent because since World War II, roughly, like we're the default place you would go. Like we kind of
Right.
invented publicly funded science. We kind of invented venture capital. We kind of invented this entire ecosystem, and
Right.
we were the only game in town for decades. So some of the phenomenon of not being the default option is a good thing. It means other countries are getting richer and other countries are getting more sophisticated, and there's more than one place in the world to make it as an entrepreneur or a top tier scientist. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't want to completely lose our edge just because.
No, we're resting on our laurels and it's
Right.
great. But how long can you do that? We might need to start taking a proactive approach as a nation.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So that's in a nutshell what the Talent Mobility Fund is trying to do
Wow.
outside of government policymakers.
So then tying that into what immigrant entrepreneurs need, how could we as a country do better to support immigrant entrepreneurs with relocating here, starting their companies here, staying here, growing here? Because they're also an important demographic, and they are kind of this overlay of, some of the engineers, some of the scientists, like they're also founders. So how can we support them?
Well, I have some ideas, but I also want to be completely candid and open to the fact that I certainly by definition don't have all the good ideas. And so many of your listeners might have good ideas about what more we should be doing or where some of the frictions are. And so I encourage them to contact me because this is one of the many market failures we're trying to address at the Talent Mobility Fund.
And just to our listeners, we'll include the links to the Talent Mobility Fund, Doug's LinkedIn, all of that in the show notes. So do check that out so you can get in touch with him. Great. You're very receptive to ideas and feedback and brainstorming, which is one of the things.
Yeah.
Collaborate.
I mean, I come up with very few ideas on my own, but I love implementing other people's good ideas. So, I mean, one very specific thing that I've always hoped would happen, but hasn't really happened yet, because again, nothing is self-executing, is when we designed the International Entrepreneur Rule, we did it very deliberately to have multiple criteria. So it was like, if you're a first-time entrepreneur, and you have validation from an external funding source, then we want USCIS to effectively piggyback on that validation. Do all the security checks, make sure you're eligible in every other respect. Of course, there's no rubber stamp, but basically, give you a really positive factor if you've raised money. And the pathway that everyone pays attention to is I think the current number is a little over $300,000. Yeah, $311,000 in equity investment.
Yes.
is 99% of the applications we got.
But that's not a hard and fast rule. And there's government
Correct.
funding, and you can have
Correct.
potential.
Yes. There's many ways through. So the threshold for government awards or grants, and that includes not just federal but state or local grants, is $124,000.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a plethora of state-based R&D funding programs. I don't have a comprehensive list in front of me. I bet some of them are open only to U.S. citizens.
Mm-hmm.
If they were open to non-citizens, then effectively that state would have a startup visa program of the kind that people are constantly urging Congress to create, and it hasn't in decades and may not. Right? So there's actually this pathway just sitting there. There's a lot of ways that I think state governments and even local governments could provide positive factors in entrepreneurs' petitions and applications, not just international entrepreneur rule, but O1 and other things. We actually put up a website during the Biden administration that is not political. So I shouldn't have said Biden administration, but we put up a website that's like how government agencies, federal, state, and local, can participate in the immigration system. I believe that website still exists. We should put it in the show notes. But there's a bunch of ways that state and local governments can facilitate immigration by entrepreneurs and other skilled individuals. So that's worth taking a look at.
Wonderful. Oh, yes. USCIS local governments. Okay. We'll include that. That's great. So it's wonderful. And then with AI, there's so much speed of innovation in artificial intelligence. There are so many founders, there are so many startups. And you've also mentioned the geopolitical and national security angle several times. And you've served as an advisor to the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. So what do you see as the most pressing issues at the intersection of AI, immigration policy, and, more broadly, society?
Oh, boy. So in a very narrow sense, AI is getting more and more sophisticated, and that's good news, I think, for immigrants. I don't think it's necessarily great news for every service provider, because I think costs are going to keep going down and down and down. And there's going to be winners and losers. And there's going to be winners and losers. But in general, what?
We'll have to sort that out.
We'll sort that out. But as a general matter, I see really interesting things happening, even in the couple months since I left government, of really innovative law firms and technology companies trying to use AI to make it easier, faster, cheaper, more persuasive to prepare applications and petitions for a whole range of immigration services. So that's just like, how do you apply AI to immigration? But I think more broadly, like you said, the intersection of thinking geopolitically, in a world where the immigration system is probably not going to undergo particularly positive reforms in the immediate term, we're still stuck at this really pivotal moment where AI is going to have all kinds of consequences for our lives, for national security, for the way wars are fought, for the way persuasion occurs, both maliciously and not maliciously. And whoever has the best talent is going to be better positioned to benefit from AI and to stave off the worst consequences. Because my incredibly sophisticated prognostication on AI is going to be like the internet, in that it's going to have some incredibly positive impacts on our lives that we quickly take for granted, and it's going to have some really negative impacts that are mostly unintended and in many ways unforeseen. But to the extent we can foresee this, it seems like a no-brainer that we'd rather have AI talent in the United States and free countries that aren't going to abuse it or are less likely to abuse it. And in the meantime, there's some sobering facts. So um, there's an interesting estimate done, I think, by Macro Polo. We can drop the link in the show notes, but they kind of used a bunch of public data to try to identify top AI researchers worldwide, like in terms of publications and other things. The top 20% of AI researchers, uh, the percentage working in the United States has declined a lot in just a period of 3 years. So it was like 59% of the world's top AI researchers were working in the US in 2019. It was 42% in 2022. I haven't seen an estimate for 2025 yet, but it's probably lower. And then if you look at the most elite AI researchers, like the top 2%, it's a slightly better story, but it's still declining. So from 65% in 2019 to 57% in 2022. And interestingly, the percentage of those most elite AI researchers working in China went from like unmeasurably negligible to 12% in 3 years.
Wow.
So it's a big deal. And like, not to be, overstating the case. I don't think you can overstate it. There was a list of like the top 50 most promising US AI startups that Forbes came out with a couple years ago. And someone had the clever idea. I believe it was Remco Zwetsloot and some other researchers, because I want to give credit where credit is due. They were like, oh, let's look at those top 50 AI startups and see who the founders are. 2/3 of them had an immigrant founder.
Yeah.
2/3. So,
See that. Center
yeah,
for Security and Emerging
that's right.
Technology. I'll post it in the show notes. Yeah.
So, we need to not shoot ourselves in the foot here. Like, we have all these inherent advantages, and it's not just the United States. Like, I'd like to see the UK and the EU and Japan and South Korea and countries in the developing world like really play to these strengths. But it's very important that that AI, as it rapidly eats the world, is harnessed for pro-social and not antisocial purposes. And so I'd rather it be happening here than elsewhere.
Yes. Yes. And what do you think our big challenges are in our U.S. immigration system, the way it currently is structured, for how we can attract and retain top global talent?
I believe the answer is actually incredibly stupidly simple.
Okay.
It's a complicated immigration system, but the single most effective way to improve it
Yeah.
is not to complicate it. It's give people more green cards. Or I should say, give more people green cards. The system was designed in 1990 when the population was a fraction of what it is now. The economy was a fraction of what it is now. And so we're stuck. I was thinking about this, Sophie. We actually, in this country, have 4 underclasses. The immigration system has 4 underclasses.
4.
4, yes. So the worst situation is being undocumented.
Undocumented.
Yeah, that's a terrible existence. It's really a stain on the country. We should give people who have committed no crimes and who have been contributing to this country for a long time some path to permanent residency. And that's what every comprehensive immigration reform under Republicans and Democrats has proposed, but has never made it across the finish line. But ultimately,
since IRCA in 1986, right?
Yeah. Reagan had an amnesty, and ever since that, amnesty has been a dirty word among some courts. So that's one. The not quite as bad, but still very fragile underclass is those with a work permit, but no guarantee that they'll ever get a green card. So people on temporary protected status, people who have a pending asylum application, people with DACA.
Pending.
Yeah, right? So there are all these ways that Congress or prior administrations has provide or parole, right? That's one that's like terribly fragile right now.
Yeah.
And this is a lot of people. This is millions of people who are very, very core to our economy and who, are neighbors and we should not be treating these people in an inhumane way. But then there's another underclass, uh, which is people with temporary work visas.
I was going to say, is it H-1B holders?
Yeah, but
Maybe you're
I would make a
treated very
distinction. Like,
well, but there's also some that are
yeah,
not.
I don't want to say it's as, it's not as dire as, but it's an underclass, right? If you're
Yeah.
on an L1 or an H1B, uh, and
You're tethered to your employer.
you're
That's your.
tethered to your employer in a way that's not great, that creates all kinds of distortions, and a potential for misbehavior on the part of employers.
Yeah.
And you don't know how long you're going to be able to stay. And then finally,
Can I guess?
yes,
Is it green card backlogs?
yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So you got it, right? There's people who they're on a temporary work visa. They're probably from India or China, but that's changing. It's going to be the whole world pretty soon,
Oh.
right? Where it's just like you can't expect like a giant country to function when you're basically telling people, yeah, come here on an H-1B and stay on an H-1B forever. Like
Yeah.
10, 15 years from now, people are going to have to start retiring on an H-1B. What's going to happen, right? These are people who have been on H-1B their entire careers and have never had the opportunity to have a green card because of Congress
Yeah.
never increasing the number of green cards, and having these artificial caps by country. And so, you know, think tanks and politicians come up with these elaborate solutions. But at the end of the day, like anyone who's been here more than, take your pick, 5 years, 10 years, they should just get a
Yeah.
green card. um, and this shouldn't be controversial,
Yeah.
because guess what? Like whatever you care about, a green card is the answer. If you care about attracting and retaining international talent, give them green cards. If
Yeah.
you care about not having abusive employers underpay their temporary workers at the expense of U.S. workers, give those temporary workers a green card and they will be on the same footing. And if they are being abused, they can take this job and shove it and go work for an employer that doesn't abuse them, because that's what a green card lets you do. So anyway, unfortunately, there is an article of faith among some folks that we must never, ever, 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 ever increase the number of green cards because that would be increasing immigration, which, among a certain strain of political thought is unacceptable.
Which also seems counter to other bipartisan streams of thought, like what you just shared about geopolitics and national security. So a lot of this flummoxes me that it's somehow, become a partisan dividing issue. But
Well, look, I mean, the politics of immigration have become very toxic, and that's no secret. But I do, and look, I guess I would see it as, and sorry for pontificating, there's kind of like, I I said I wasn't going to talk too much about politics, but what the hell, you drew it out of me. I think there's basically uh, three categories of lawmaker. If you put a gun to my head and said like, what, and this isn't about, it doesn't track party necessarily,
Yeah.
right? So if you said, okay, like where do lawmakers stand on just the question of like, should there be more green cards, less green cards, whatever. And for those who are not immigration experts, when I say green card, I mean permanent residency. So somebody who is afforded almost all the rights and privileges of a U.S. citizen, except they can't vote. They can still be deported if they commit a crime, right? But it's the final stepping stone towards becoming a U.S. citizen. And it means that you are pretty secure. You can work for anybody who will hire you. You can travel without.
You have to live here. You can't just be popping in for a few months. This has to be home. Yeah.
Right. And again, like most of the people who are working in America, like they're already here. So we're not even talking about like an influx of new immigrants. We're talking about
what's like our neighbors.
Exactly.
Right.
So I think there's kind of three viewpoints. There's like the hard right. We actually want fewer green cards. We want to constrain and restrict immigration pretty much down to the bone, which I do not think is a majority viewpoint, even among Republican lawmakers, but is obviously ascendant right now. Then there's the viewpoint of like, well, I think green cards are like taxes. I don't ever want them to go up. um,
Mm-hmm.
which is where you get a lot of legislative proposals. Um, and then I think, there's both Republicans and Democrats who are probably on board with increasing the number of green cards, but no one's got a particular number in mind. And so I think the voices of zero or hold the line are louder than the voices of,
Yes.
I don't know, more, maybe.
Right. Nobody's going out there and saying we need 10 million a year, right? Instead
Right.
of 500,000 or whatever, but just
Right.
pick a number, any number. What should it be and why? We're not,
Right.
nobody in politics is saying that.
Right. And I think that I would hope that changes over time, because it is something that I think is intuitive for most people. That
Yeah,
if
even
you've
if we
been here,
had like we just the international entrepreneur rule adjust has a triennial inflation adjustment. Green cards could have a triennial population adjustment, right? It could be
that is a
cool.
terrific idea. Set it and forget it. I hope it catches on.
Yeah. That would be great. That would be so great. Okay. So we've talked about your career in science, entrepreneurship, policy. We have a lot of early stage founders listening to this podcast in different parts of the world who maybe, hope to come to the US one day, or folks who are already here, but they're transitioning and becoming what they will be for the next phase. So if you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to your younger self as you were transitioning from evolutionary biology to immigration policy, what would it be?
In that like incredibly circuitous transition.
Yeah.
So I feel like one of the most important things I've learned that I still struggle to keep top of mind and follow its precepts is uh, the difference between high impact and low impact work.
Um,
So before I started my job at USCIS, I was like, all right, what's the most important thing I need to keep in mind, given everything I've learned so far? And it's that you can think of it as a 2x2 matrix.
mhm.
There are things that are high impact. There are things that are low impact, and that's one axis. The other axis is effort. So some things are high effort, some things are low effort. I feel like both in entrepreneurship and in policy, and really in life, everyone's always searching for the low effort, high impact activity,
Mhm.
the low hanging fruit, right? Oh,
Yeah.
wouldn't it be great? Like, wait, we got to find out like one weird trick where like we have minimal effort and you have this like huge impact. Um, and it doesn't exist. um, I can't tell you how many times I thought, oh, I found it. I found the mythical low hanging fruit. And there's like, no,
Yeah.
it actually took like 6 months to actually pick up the fruit. Um, so, so what I realized is it's actually a 2x1 matrix. There is no such thing as anything that's low effort. Everything is high effort in life in general. And so really, the trick is when you see something that looks like it's worth doing, being very rigorous and unsentimental about, is this really a high impact thing or is this a low impact thing? Because you're going to spend a lot of time working on it no matter what. So you got
Yeah.
to try to stay out of that vortex where you're spinning and spinning and spinning over something that actually doesn't matter that much. And, spend your hard work on hard things that have a high
Yeah.
impact.
Great advice. Thank you. And then since you have experience as a policymaker and as a startup founder, what is one lesson from building a company that you think government institutions could adopt to be more innovative and effective?
Um, I'm going to answer that question, and then I'm going to turn it. Actually, I'm going to turn it around first because
Oh,
we always we always talk about like what can government learn from startups, and and I'm telling you, I've been on both sides, and startups can learn something from government too, right? Like there's
okay.
this assumption that like, well, government is slow and government is plotting. That is true often, but you know what? So are all large institutions. Like
Um,
large corporates are also very deliberative
that's
and
why they're disruptible.
right, exactly, right. But that's not always bad, right? Like it's all about balance. And so here's my take it like here's something startups can learn from large institutions, including government.
Okay.
Not everything that's imperfect is broken. Perfect is
Um,
broken. incrementalism gets a lot of flack, but over time, it's like the magic of compounding interest. Incrementalism achieves immense impact. And then finally, like, there's really no substitute for deep expertise. It's great to be a maverick, but deep expertise is irreplaceable. Okay, so that's I have to say, out of respect for all my wonderful civil servants I worked with, and will hopefully work with again, that startups can learn something from government. But in terms of what government can learn from startups, is it's okay to go faster.
Yeah.
And I've been reflecting on these last couple months, and what I believe is that, you know, any new administration has goals, but only has a limited period of time. So the question is, are you able to achieve your goals before the time runs out? And that's a function of speed. And the current administration is going like 200 miles an hour and is going to crash the car. And I don't endorse that. But I'm also realizing, you know, prior administrations, both Democrat and Republican, were probably only going like 20 to 30 miles an hour on an interstate highway, right?
Oh.
And so my new mantra, if we ever get a chance and the privilege to make change in government again, is just go the speed limit.
Great.
It's 70 miles an hour. Let's just go the speed limit. It's going to be okay.
Words of wisdom, Doug Rand. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's a delight chatting with you as always.
Thank you. And thank you for all the work you're doing in your own practice to make America safe and thriving for global innovators.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to further conversations about all the wonderful things you're going to be doing at Talent Mobility Fund. And everybody, that link will be in the show notes. So if you're looking at those funding opportunities, definitely check them out. And as Doug mentioned, you can be in touch with him as well. And so show notes have all Doug's links, also have the ability there to sign up for the Alcorn Immigration Law newsletter. So please do get the latest immigration updates. And also please be sure to share this episode with a friend who's interested in immigration, policy, law, entrepreneurship, how we can promote the sciences. So you help us out by sharing. Thank you so much.